Good afternoon. A bit loud. There we go. Good afternoon. Is that more appropriate? I'll just whisper. How about that? Here we are. This is it. The final session of 8. It's been a long 4 days, but I think a very productive 4 days. I'd like to reiterate thanks from everyone in the TNFD for all the participants and all the audience members. All the feedback that we've had, it's been really, really useful. And we really, really appreciate that. So thank you. I'm not going to say a lot because many of you have been here for a lot of the sessions. Some of you all, congratulations. So I will try and keep this brief. I just want to say one thing, which I think is really important. We've heard some really interesting conversations. We've had some really interesting conversations about fantastic data that's available and some really good solutions. But I think it's really important as well to have a dose of reality here, right? I think it's, if we think about what the TNFD framework is trying to do, is it's about trying to bring financial markets to understand nature, to be able to, understand risk, impacts and deficiencies, risks and opportunities. But we must understand where a lot of the financial market is, and that is at a very nascent phase, if that, in terms of understanding. So we must encompass that in our thoughts and realize that let's not get too detailed too early here. Let's understand that we need to bring them in, I guess, in a way where they're comfortable, but also that we can move forward. Just if I can reiterate that point, that with regards to the data catalyst, it's about trying to enable the broadest adoption of the framework in the shortest time possible, whilst remaining scientifically credible. So I think it's it'd be great to get insights from the likes of MSCI. Just arrived now. You can give us that sense of reality in terms of where their client base currently is, and what we kind of need to do to kind of bring them to the start line. I think we all know the format of these sessions. The first segment will be done by a fantastic panel, which will be facilitated by my colleague, Natalie. And then the second segment is audience participation. So it's hugely important that we can all participate, looking at you, Chris, to participate and really get your insights as well. So without further ado, Natalie.
Hi. So my name is Nathalie Bourgeot. I am with the TNFD, and with the TNFD, I'm the lead for financial markets. So it's quite appropriate that I moderate this session about financial services and what financial services, how can they use data in order to, little by little, get ready to adopt TNFD. What kind of data is already there? What can you start by doing already? What do you have at hand? That's the idea of this panel, and maybe what you will have by September, but not what you will have in 5 years, because you need to get going. And in fact, there's plenty already there, and I'm sure this panel will show you that. So we're having here very distinguished panelists and great companies that propose great data. I myself, I used to work for a company that produce data as well. So I'm really enthused to have all my fellow rivals, former rivals that are around. For instance, I used to work for 427 that has been absorbed by Moody's. So anyway, we are having here, maybe why don't you, each of you, present yourself quickly, and then I'll ask questions to each of you, but maybe, I'm not going to close about who you are, etc. Just go ahead.
But in the sense of introduction, or also introduction of what we do in our own firms?
Do both.
Okay.
But in a, 2 minutes.
Should we sit in those chairs, right? So that we can see you. Okay, so, well, I'm Silva Benson. I'm part of the applied research teams at MSCI. So MSCI, as some of you might know, is a large data provider. So data service provider, both on the ESG rating side, but also climate metrics, and increasingly so biodiversity, as well as index provider. We are a big index builder and provider. So climate has been part of the MSCI discussion for quite a while, but biodiversity is quite new, I must say. I joined MSCI just a year ago, and when I arrived, one of the things I asked was, what about biodiversity? And I remember that my American senior client coverage friends would think it was a very odd idea to start thinking about biodiversity when many of our clients are barely starting the climate journey. But actually a year later, we've made a lot of progress because the awareness has risen very significantly, I think, thanks to the TNFD's work over the past few months, but also, with COP15 on the horizon, this was pretty clear it was going to be an increasingly important situation. Nonetheless, our global client base, so our ESG and climate clients, is about 1,700 clients. These are large asset managers, asset owners, insurers, banks. Most of them have not started this work. A number of them have started to ask questions to us, and a smaller number need solutions. So the crowd in Montreal is not representative of the global investment community. The people who come to Montreal, to COP15 and to the side events, they're already more than aware. I mean, they're ready to, actually in my case, emit 1.8 tons of carbon to come here to understand what to do better, what to do more tomorrow. But most of our clients are not there yet at all. And most of them are very confused. And we have to, part of the job of people like MSCI or some of our peers is to bring more clarity in this debate, to break down the complexity of the multifaceted drivers of ecosystem pressures into something that is implementable by large asset managers, portfolio managers, banks, etc. So the journey has just begun, but it's not a blank page. There's already a lot of data points. We already have a lot of raw data points in our ratings tools, in our controversies database, in our regulatory tools, in our SDG, sustainable finance modules, etc. So there's already a lot of data points that some of our clients have started to use around biodiversity and land use, around water stress, etc. But what they're asking now, what they're needing now, is more and more a comprehensive set of solutions. I see Natalie, you're nodding. Is it because I'm speaking too long? Oh, 2 minutes. Usually I'm not. I thought this was fine. Okay, sorry. So I'll stop here.
Yep. It took him a lot of carbon to come here, so he should speak. Wijnand Broer, Program Manager at the Partnership for Biodiversity Accounting Financials. By now a group of almost 50 financial institutions from 13 countries. You could say it's kind of the sister organization of the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, which has now turned to a global initiative with over 300 financial institutions. What we do is we develop the PBAF standard, a standard on impact and dependency assessment. Not as much as a tool, it's more like setting the requirements and the recommendations for the tools that are out there and the data. Because there's a lot of tools popping up, there's a lot of data providers stepping in the end you want the right tools and the right data for the financial institutions because they will need them to steer their investments. We started end of 2019, published the first standard in 2020, very much focusing on footprinting at the time. The second version was published in June this year, a broader focus, so also for looking at other tools like IBET, etc. It was already mentioned several times that we really must do hand-holding with the financial institutions. When we started to develop the PBAF standard and we started working groups with financial institutions, we were thinking, well, we're just going to write the standard, but you really have to take it step by step because there's so much out there, it becomes quite confusing actually. So I guess also an important task of what we're doing is also to provide the guidance to show what is out there when you're talking about the tools, what questions do they answer, Also what are the limitations of the tools and the data that come out of those tools, because that will also decide how you can use them in practice for now.
Please. Hi. So that's not on. Okay, thank you. So my name is Jolene, and I am the communications lead for Trace at Global Canopy. Global Canopy is a UK-based nonprofit, and basically what we do is we provide data for nature. So having heard people all week say we need more data, I'm like, yes, hello. So we have a wide range of tools and products and offerings. For example, Global Canopy is a co-founder of TNFD, and we've also were involved in the development of Encore. I personally work principally on our supply chain mapping initiative, Trace, but what I wanted to share in today's session is a newly beta launched data offering that we have that is targeted toward the financial institutions who want to understand and assess their exposure to deforestation specifically. As you all know, forests are obviously at the heart of the nature-climate nexus to a very large extent. 11% of global emissions are attributable to deforestation and land use change, and agriculture is the main driver of tropical deforestation. Something like 90 to 99% is linked. So this database it's called Forest IQ. You can find more information about it on the Global Canopy website. But what we've sought to do is work together with a working group of about 10 financial institutions to bring together market-leading data on corporate performance of companies who are exposed to deforestation, conversion of natural ecosystems, and associated human rights abuses due to trade in palm oil, cattle, soy, timber, pulp and paper, and rubber. I think that's the list. You know, another common theme I've heard over the last week is many people saying, okay, we accept there is data, but there's too much of it, and it's confusing, and it's all over the place. And yeah, we hear you. So we have sought in Forest IQ to unite data sets from a range of partners. So Global Canopy has worked together with ZSL Spot, and also with Neuro Alpha, who are a fintech firm, and also the Stockholm Environment Institute. So we've brought together data sets like Trace, which is a supply chain mapping program, like ZSL Spot, like RSPO, FAO Stat, and Global Canopy's Forest 500 index. And we've put these together in a data offering that basically takes this corporate performance data and demonstrates it through 3 core metrics. So the exposure of companies, the materiality of their exposure to forest risk commodities for their business, and their performance in terms of the policies and actions that they have taken. So the Forest IQ makes available both these metrics as well as the underlying data on which they are based, because we know that some financial institutions may have their own systems for considering this data. I think I will be in danger of crossing the time limit if I keep going, but I just wanted to give a brief explanation and to say that we beta launched it this week. We are looking to officially launch it in April next year, and we are very much actively soliciting the involvement of financial institutions who either want to be part of the working group or just want to get updates and understand more, or want to look at what we've got and give us feedback, because feedback is life. Yes, please feel free to ask questions if you have any.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nathalie. Good afternoon, everyone. Mathieu Morin. So can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Iceberg Data Lab. So we are a fintech. We were quick start, let's say, by a consortium of asset managers willing to have data solutions about biodiversity enabling them to integrate that dimension into basically their decision-making process. So impact data, dependency, risk management, and so on and so on. That consortium, as of today, is comprised of Mirova, BNP AM, AXA IM, Sycomore, Marshall Wace, Kerner Blue Capital, and Robeco, and quite similar to how the TNFD is working. It's a quite iterative process, because basically what they are providing us, is feedback to making sure that the tools that we are providing are actually useful for integration into their decision-making process beyond what our scientific governance is providing us about the accuracy of the signals that we provide, which is a compass steering in the right direction when financial institutions want to know where are the first thing to look at sectoral level, at corporate level, and at product level, which is the granularity at which our model is based. We are now launching, after 2 years of iterative development, dependency and positive impact indicator. And so the good news that I have for you, and I think that opinion will be concurred among my fellow panelists, is that we don't lack data, actually, regarding biodiversity and nature. We lack data solutions, meaning ways to integrate data directly into decision-making process to respond to very practical, operational questions that you may have. For instance, what are the deforestation-related risks in my portfolio? Second, we lack of experience. And third, we lack of process, which is where obviously the TNFD framework is extremely useful. And well, we are very happy to be there today to share our experience and well, exchange with you about that framework, current state of development.
Yes, hello everyone. So I'm Justine Mariette, a project officer at CDC Biodiversity. CDC Biodiversity, you may know, is a French company, subsidiary of the Caisse des Dépôts group, so the biggest public financial institution in France. So as our name is saying, we are mainly working on biodiversity, so restoration solution, and also on biodiversity footprint assessment for both companies and financial institutions. So we have built a tool, Global Biodiversity Score, which is a tool allowing economic activities to assess their impact on biodiversity in any square kilometer and through the value chain. So they have the idea on scope 1, but also on scope 2 and 3. And with another data provider, Carbon for Reference, we built the BIGBS database, so biodiversity impact analysis database. So basically, they have data on carbon and on finance, and we use the GBS tool to have a database on listed assets. So it enables our clients to use the database both to know the impact of their portfolio, so to assess the transition risk they have, and also they are able to see the dependencies of their portfolio on scope 1 and also on scope 3. So they are also able to see what are their transition risks. And what we are currently seeing through also, we are doing also a pilot testing for the TNFD framework. What we are currently seeing is that we have data. Yeah, that's for sure. But we don't have enough company-specific data to refine the assessment. So, for example, for our clients, if we want to do the evaluate part, we don't have how many products they produce, how many land they use, and how many GHG emissions that we have. But yeah, we this data on company-specific data, so that's why we are struggling now. But it's good to have the TNFD framework to okay, focus on what are the challenges and what we can improve and how we can improve that.
Thanks a lot. Well, you've had a first panorama of who does what, and I'm going to ask the panelists a couple questions, and I'm going to announce what we're going to talk about. I'd like to talk about how a financial institution looks at a portfolio, and who can, among the panelists, can provide solutions with a portfolio view, because typically financial institutions, they have to deal differently from corporations. They have to deal with mass of investees, mass of loans. And the first question is, okay, I have this huge portfolio. I have thousands, even millions of counterparts. How do I just deal with portfolios? So that's the first question. Then I will ask about location. Who tells what about location? So that will be another question. And then I'll go into who tells what about value chain, because that's another question that we have in TNFD. We're asking everyone to report on value chain and have a view on the portfolios that you have and what is in their value chains. And then also I'll go through, well, how do you make this data that you provide fit for purpose? You know, who aggregates what? How does it end up being good data for an insurance, good data for a bank, where in a bank, etc. So first question, on portfolio, who wants to maybe describe how the data that you provide or the solutions that you provide help financial institutions take this bird's eye view of their portfolio? And I'm turning a bit more over there, but I don't know.
We can answer both together. Yeah. So what we are seeing is that financial institutions, they want simple data. They want to see, like, okay, one score to understand what is the impact of their portfolio. They have, what you say, they have too many data, too many metrics, too many things. So what you try to do is to give them a simple score they can see, and they can after act with that. So we can have this simple view, but also they can, if they want to, they can go deeper in the data. They can have the main pressure if they want to see where are the main pressure driver. They can also focus on the value chain. What is the cause of the company that has this impact? See that is the one to. Is that what we see?
Can you describe what would be a portfolio view? What would it look like? What you tell? What you have a portfolio view with CDC biodiversity. What does it look like?
So for example, if I take the dependencies, you will have like a heat map. So you will have for each company a row, and you will have the ecosystem services. And you have a range from 0 to 1, 0 to 100, sorry. So from very low dependencies to very high. So we will be able to see for each company if they have very high impacts, very high dependencies, and on which ecosystem. What we are trying to do now, it's because we're focusing on average dependencies, and what we are trying to do is to focus also on critical dependencies, meaning the dependencies you have on ecosystem services that can't be substitutable. So, for example, if a company is highly dependent on water, currently we can't replace water, we can't produce water. So there is a high risk on this company, so we have to focus on this one. So, yeah.
As I think that the best response to your question is a case study, I would recommend those of you who want to have an example of what can look like a biodiversity footprint at portfolio level, to have a look at the NPAM Article 29 report published this year, available online. That is the case of the XIM as well, which will provide you an example of what can be done today. And they publish the fact that, if I remember correctly, the total footprint of their asset management branch represented an equivalent artificialization using the same unit square kilometer MSA, equivalent to 10 times the city of London, which is a first concrete step, very concrete, especially for stakeholders and so on, of what is a biodiversity footprint. What it can tell you is what are the heat map in your portfolio. In other words, when, as a responsible investor, you should start engaging, what are the sectors? What are the companies? What are the products? No more, no less. And that's obviously an iterative process because it will increase company reporting, because indeed we lack meaningful and granular company reported in some geographies, in some sectors, and so on. But if they are not engaged by their banks, asset managers, and so on, it will boil down to national regulation level to improve that, and probably it will be very slow. And that's where the financial community can help. It starts by that, reporting, engage, improve the transparency, and then that virtuous circle is engaged. So that's concretely what you can see to respond to your question, Natalie.
Super, thanks. Yes, Wijnen.
If I can still add to that, much has been said. I think it's key to realize what question do we want to answer on a portfolio level. It has been mentioned many times already during the past few days, the use of Encore, for example, to get a better idea of how material is the topic for our portfolio. That's one question that you could answer. It could also be the objective, well, we cannot do everything. Where do we start? So what are the impact hotspots, basically? Realizing that, of course, you're talking about potential impacts, not about actual impacts. You're calculating or using the overviews of Encore to decide what is important within our portfolio. And then you will need to zoom in. And probably when you zoom in, you can again maybe use footprinting to get a better idea of what sectors, maybe what companies within a sector and the drivers behind the impact. It's still potential impact. So the next question, when you're really down to a certain level where you start thinking, okay, and then where are those companies located? Then the location question comes in. And that's, of course, a bridge to the second question or the third, maybe. Yeah, but I guess on a portfolio level, it's key to understand that, especially when you have a large portfolio, you will be talking about potential impact or potential dependencies, actually. And that it's a screening step. It's a step to further zoom in at a later stage.
We've talked about the bird eye view, and now we're going to start zooming. So on zooming, the question that comes quickly is the question of location. As in the TNFD, we have this how-to guide that's called LEAP, L for locate, E for evaluate, A for assess, and then P for prepare. So it's first thing is locate. So on location, maybe Sylvain, what can you tell us about how you would address location and how you can help on this?
So we do have a lot of location data. We have a so-called asset location database with several 100,000 locations. So we can tell to our clients which issuers have locations where, but what we don't know is what type of asset that is. So we usually don't know, sometimes we do, but we usually don't know if this is a hugely polluting factory or mine, or if it's a simple office building. That obviously is a problem. And I understand from speaking to my ALD colleagues that there is still a lot of inaccuracies in the data. So they're still scrubbing the data all the time. Nonetheless, I mean, actually yesterday we launched 2 new screens, and they're using the asset location database quite extensively, especially the there's one of those two tools which is about mapping assets to sensitive areas. So areas of, where you have fragile ecosystems, areas that are protected, areas of mean species abundance above the median, etc. So this is where we use the asset location. But again, as I said, there's one big caveat is that we don't know what type of asset it is most of the time. That was short.
Thank you very much. Anyone wants to add something about location? About how to address that?
No, I can. What we do in the PWC standard actually is to show impact is impact driver plus location. And you will see that there's a wide variety of tools. Some of them only focus on or mostly focus on impact drivers like footprinting. Some of them mostly focus on location like IBET. Some of them try to do the combination like STAR by IUCN. And I guess that at the moment you do not know the location, at some point maybe some precautionary principle could come in the sense that when you take away the impact driver, you would still also address the impact even if you do not know the location. But location indeed is a key challenge, apart from the third question that you're going to ask. But yeah, which is true. And of course, there is improvement. There's a lot of study going on. Oxford has an initiative also to see, okay, where are assets actually located? Indeed, the point that you mentioned, that in certain cases, you don't know whether you're talking about a corporate office or the actual primary production location. That's an issue. So there's a lot of work to be done, I guess. But yeah.
Yes, I would say that the next question is a major challenge. That one, corporates know where their assets are and their nature. So at the end of the day, it boils down to a question of transparency. And so we face the same, which is why I'm optimistic, but it requires engagement and the virtuous circles that I mentioned earlier. We face the same challenge, which is why we are looking at location at corporate level and for project financing, asset financing, that kind of things. But we do not do it at portfolio screening. Otherwise, you may create a major bias, which is to provide an advantage to companies which are not transparent on their sensitive asset and sensitive place, which would be a kind of worst case scenario for provider of data at an investment universe level.
On this question of location and engagement with companies, I'll just share quickly my experience as a former banker. It's so when you start engaging with a company, it's always easier when you have some kind of data and saying, okay, I've heard that you had this and that location. Is it a plant you have there? Or is it an office? You're probably you will get an answer rather than if you're just asking, okay, tell me all about where are all your locations. So the first data that is already there is a great help in the first steps of engagement. I'm turning to, before we talked about the third topic, I'll turn to Dan here from PWC, who has, because we don't have here users of the data, but I'd like Dan to speak for them just for a moment.
All right, thanks, Natalie. So Dan O'Brien, I'm a partner with PwC and also a member of the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures. And we were hoping today to have a representative from financial services who could provide us with the sort of use case, the user perspective on data and some practical examples. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get somebody, but I was just at the COP. And I caught a session with Marine from HSBC. And I thought it was worthwhile, it would be great for her to be here and kind of tell us what their experience has been. But I thought I could relay this to you because I think it really brings everything home. So what HSBC has done is, and this is what she was presenting, and there's actually a public report on this, but they've they've used the Encore tool to map out their impacts and dependencies across their entire portfolio. And they did this as an initial screening tool to identify and prioritize where they have significant impacts and key dependencies, similar to what CDC Biodiversity is doing with the footprinting. They identified that water dependency on water is one of their key material issues, right? So they now know that they have some information about geographically where the greatest dependencies are. So now, this gives them a sense of exposure, right? And exposure is important, but it doesn't necessarily tell them about risk. And so what they did, which was, I think, quite innovative, is they worked with Cambridge Institute of Sustainability and Leadership, the CECIL group, to look at if they could quantify that risk associated with their exposure to water dependency. So I actually took a picture of the slide here that she was presenting. So I'm reading off of her slide. Hopefully she doesn't mind this. She's actually also a task force member as well. So they looked at heavy industry in Asia specifically, and they made some assumptions. So what if there was a 3-month shutdown in production due to lack of water? So severe droughts in that industry there. And what they were able to do is translate that into kind of an estimated shock in terms of decrease in production, turnover, and what that would cost the companies that would be experiencing that. And they were able to actually then look at translating that into credit risk and a credit risk rating. And what they found is that after doing this analysis, they could actually quantify like what the downgraded credit risk would be for these particular companies based on that particular dependency. I think they were estimating it was about, she said, two notches for some and up to 6 notches. I'm assuming those are points perhaps that she meant by that. And a portfolio RWA increase of 20 up to 20%. So this is, I think, a really interesting example of how they've gone beyond exposure, so that you sort of see how they've gone high level Encore to get to key dependencies. Now they know that exposure, but now they're translating that into potential financial risk across their portfolio. And for those that are interested, it's the report is available on the web. It's called Nature-Related Financial Risk Use Case: Impact on Water Curtailment on the Credit Rating of Heavy Industry Companies in East Asia. So it was HSBC and the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability and Leadership. So I think that probably represents a really good use case of how financial institutions can actually translate their exposure into actual risk, which is, I think, one of the challenges that a lot of organizations are facing around nature and biodiversity.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yes, we were supposed to have Citi with us, but unfortunately, Devon Stone is sick. So back on the different questions that I had, I'd like now to, for the panelists, to talk about the question of the value chain, the supply chain, because we're asking at TNFD that the supply chains be known and understood, and what would you propose on this, and how would, what kind of data could be available for you to do that? And I know this is not exactly the one product you're pushing, but it's also part of Trace and at the beginning of Trace. So I'd love to hear you.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for, because if I start talking about Trace, it may never end. Trace is the supply chain mapping initiative that Global Canopy founded with the Stockholm Environment Institute in 2015, and we work with a range of partners across the world, including many research partners in universities and also NGO partners in producing countries. And so once again, this is a project that's focused on mapping the international trade and financing of forest risk commodities, the key agricultural commodities that drive tropical deforestation. And it actually, what I have to say goes a little bit to this discussion earlier about location as well. Because what Trace has done is to connect regions of production for forest risk commodities and the deforestation and other impacts that happen, and connect them to supply chain actors who source these commodities from these regions, and then connect that up to importing markets. And I will spare you the very long methodological explanation, but broadly speaking, there are two steps. One is to map the supply chain, and we've done that by taking basically disparate publicly available data sets, such as shipping data, customs declarations, tax information, that might tell you where assets are, like a soy silo or cattle slaughterhouse. And we've used that to basically create a map of supply chains for particular forest risk commodities in particular countries. So for instance, using the location data, we might say, okay, based on where the soy silos are, that we know are owned or linked to a particular company, a particular supply chain actor, we will then say, given what would be economic in terms of transporting of soy, if we've got soy sourced from this particular municipality in Brazil, let's say, we can allocate X percentage of that volume to supply chain actor X and Y percentage to this other supply chain actor. And then we connect that up with the shipping data to link it to importing markets. And so that's step one, you build a supply chain map. Step two is you link it to deforestation. So this uses geospatial intelligence, by which I mean maps. 5 years ago on the map, you saw a forest, now you see a soy field. So now you can confidently say, okay, this is an instance of soy conversion. Since you, company X, source 60% of the volume from that municipality of production, you are exposed to 60% of this spatially identified deforestation in that municipality. And it may well be that this is not, 100% what's done, because we're not investigative journalists. We didn't go there and take pictures of them hacking down the trees. But it is a basis to talk to a company and say, this is the best available representation of the sourcing patterns from this region. If you have data to the contrary, kindly tell us, your investors, so that we can clear you of these heinous charges of exposure to deforestation. So Trace is then, we cover the major forest risk commodities in major producing areas. So indigenous palm oil, soy, beef in Brazil, and recently released data on cocoa in Côte d'Ivoire. And we often get asked the question, can you expand this? Can you please cover more commodities? Can you please cover more countries? Can you cover mining? Can you link this to water? Can you link it to other things? And I think in principle, there's absolutely no reason why any of these things can't be done. It would just take a lot of investment in order to do it. But I think that it's a good demonstration that actually supply chain transparency is possible, and it's also a very good tool to prompt disclosure. So just to give an example where there has been some disclosure prompted by this. So the French Ministry for Ecological Transition used trace data in order to construct a dashboard that showed the deforestation exposure associated with soy imports to France. And so this was used as a kind of monitoring and accountability tool. These volumes were published on a website that Trace helped to create for the French ministry. And as a result of this conversation, this initiated a conversation with soy traders in France, who were then willing to talk to the ministry and discuss actually what their volumes were. So that's a very interesting example of how, if we create supply chain maps based on publicly available information, that might help to elicit disclosure from companies as well.
Thank you. There's nothing like transparency. I'm turning to both Mathieu and Justine. Maybe you can talk a little bit of how your tools can help understand supply chains and what it tells your, the people that use your data, and how it's constructed too. How do you get to those results that you present?
Okay. Yes. So actually, for the locate part, meaning geographical location, we can put those data if we have them, but we can't provide those data. So we need other tools, so like Trace. And that's why also I think collaboration between tools are really, really important. And there, we have to go there. So we have to have collaboration with IBAT, with Anchor, with Trace, and to have an overview of the impact and dependencies, location, and everything. But on the other locations, so more on the scope where your impact are, they are able to see it in the database. So if the main impact are on scope 1 of the companies of the portfolio, for example, or if they are on scope 3, we can see that in the database. So maybe that's what I say. We have to collaborate, and we are very also interested in having such data to improve also our assessment.
Yes, indeed. It's the question of the supply chain boils down to, as you said, the scope 3, and that underlines the importance of factoring in the model the scope 3 downstream, or in that case upstream, because if you look at the most impactful sector on biodiversity, which is food, if you don't look at the supply chain, well, you're wasting your time basically. So you have models, you mentioned FAO allowing to have a good idea of what are the underlying constituent that you need to produce food anyway. You have some disclosure. I have on top of my mind Kellogg, for instance, disclosing year after year the volumes by country of its supply chain. But we have to face a reality, which is, in my opinion, the challenge is not asset level data, as mentioned earlier, but commodity level data, where indeed we have excellent data on palm oil. But if you take the list of all the sensitive commodities listed recently by the EU Parliament, rubber, cocoa, soya, beef, and so on, well, we need way better disclosure, or we face two bad issues, which are either to consider that everything which is not certified is prone to deforestation, overestimate the problem, and lose credibility in engagement, or the other way around, allocate it 1% for the beef, Brazil, for instance, and say, okay, it's negligible, which is not. So here, we need certification and we need monitoring system. And I think that a great part of the solution here boils down in engagement from a financial institution. In my opinion, we should not wait for the data to be there because it is that engagement which will lead to the existence and reliability of the data on that.
Yes, and we need company to report for us to refine our assessment, actually.
John? Can I just, I totally agree with Mathieu. If you don't go down supply chains, you're wasting your time. And we can put a figure to this. So on the deforestation side, the tool we produced yesterday, if you don't go down the supply chain, you flag about 4% of ACWI for deforestation risks, which is already over 100 issues. ACWI is about 3,000 issues. But if you do go down one step down into the tier 1 suppliers, you flag about 8% of ACWI constituents. And of course, the big increase comes from food. Whereas without the supply chains, a lot of the flag companies are a little bit in food, but mostly mining, utilities, and so on. So it's hugely important. And there, the supply chain data is really not as good as we'd want it to be. We produce it by looking at the business mix, etc., and using public disclosures, but it should be a lot more improved. Agree. We shouldn't wait to see this data in order to engage. We already know it's bad, and it should be engaged.
Yeah, maybe to add one thing, because it's often used is modeling of supply chains, of course. Have one of the mostly used databases, the Axio-based database, developed in Europe, covering a large part of the world. It's a so-called extended input-output database. So it also looks at trade flows between countries and between sectors. And using that database, you can actually model average supply chains. Of course, on a screening level, that could be something that you could do if you do not have any other data available on your supply chain. Of course, the pity is that the moment you start using model data on supply chains, same is true when you use the data for sector averages, for example, that it will not be responsive to actions that a company is already taking. And that's what we also see with footprinting. We've also worked with ASN Bank, for example, on footprinting. They have a very strict policy already on biodiversity, but that policy is currently not yet reflected in the footprint because we're using average data, sector average data. So that's something to keep in mind when you do not have data on the supply chain. You can model, definitely also on a screening level to decide, okay, where are probably the impact hotspots in my portfolio, but beware that it will not be responsive to company action. And I know there's of course work on the way to make it more responsive, for example, also filtering in certifications and stuff like that. But that's a good thing to remember.
Thanks a lot. This brings me to another question. We're talking about footprinting here, and I want to do a bit of maybe explaining and understanding about this footprinting. So maybe if some of you could explain what is footprinting, what do we mean by footprinting, what is footprinting data, and then also tell us what it does and what it doesn't do. So that I think that'd be lovely.
I feel like it. So footprinting. I guess that most of the person here are familiar with carbon footprinting. You start from what a company does. That activity generates GHG emissions. It's true also in its supply chain and in relation to the use phase of its product, scope 3. And so you can go from, therefore, a portfolio, an investment, a loan in a company to GHG emission and a footprint at the end of the day of your portfolio. Good news is for biodiversity is exactly the same rationale, but where carbon footprint is a flat, biodiversity is a building because you are layering up multiple sources of consumption of scarce resources, such as land use, first pressure, according to IPBS, or generation of release of pollution, in the soil, in the atmosphere, in the water, GHG emission, nitrogen, sulfur, and so on and so on. And you are layering it up. So you need much more data, environmental models, and so on and so on. But the philosophy is strictly the same. That's what it does. What it doesn't do is summarize and capture everything which is related to the question of biodiversity, because everything cannot be modeled. And if you mentioned, I think earlier, DNA data, for instance, the choice of a major food company to diversify or not the genetic biodiversity of its supply chain, as of today, at least to the best of my knowledge, but tell me if I'm wrong, cannot be captured in a model, not to mention the level of reporting available from company. So that cannot be done. So we can put the spotlight on the most material impact. That's where footprinting helps. But it's certainly not the end of the discussion with a company. It's the beginning and helps to know to which company discuss and about what. No more, no less.
Yeah, I think he said everything. But if I may come back to the eDNA part, I think it could be also interesting to see, because us, we are saying this thing globally, really globally, through the value chain all over the world. but eDNA could maybe support what we are saying when we say, okay, if you reduce GHG emission, and if you reduce your land use, you will improve your biodiversity. And maybe we could also model that with other data like eDNA, but it may be too soon to say that, I don't know. So yeah, biodiversity footprinting is really linking economic activities to impact and using a lot of data, and starting from a screening just with financial institution, as we can say, so average with Exio-based model, for example, and after refining it with other data on specific data of the company and of the portfolio.
Well, maybe to add one thing is what you already mentioned. Actually, it's you have to look at the combination of tools. I guess the result of a footprinting exercise is one piece of the puzzle, and it's actually very much an impact driver based piece of the puzzle. So if you also want to bring in location characteristics, you would need a tool like IBET, for example, or a tool like STAR from IUCN. So it's also having smart combinations of different tools that will provide you with the information that you actually need.
Brings me very nicely to my last point about producing data that is fit for purpose. So how are you all looking at that question? How are you maybe working together? Who are the partnerships? What are the partnerships you're developing? So how are you taking that?
So for starters, when we talk to partners, if they can't map a footprint or any kind of data to a given issuer, for us that's not fit for purpose. It's pretty basic, but there are actually a lot of tools out there that are mapping, heat maps, things like this. Very interesting, maybe from from an academic perspective or maybe even policy making. But for, at least as far as I know, for portfolio management purposes, you can't really use it. There's a lot also of really good databases out there that have, I'm sorry to bring this up, but licensing issues that people like MSCI or S&P and Moody's can't use because they are not designed to be commercialized. And it's not just in the biodiversity space. That's that's a recurring issue. So unfortunately, that deprives global investors from really interesting data, because if we can't repackage it into a tool that's usable on a Bloomberg terminal, on the MSCI client platform, etc., then well, it's going to miss a lot of users. So that's my own 2 cents here.
Yeah, maybe something that I also mentioned last Sunday when we had a presentation about the different tools and methodologies and stuff like that, that there's many initiatives, but it's also a relatively small world. We know each other quite well. Also the development of the PBUF standard is also together with the footprinting companies, but also with the other tool developers. I think the data catalyst initiative hopefully will bring this bringing together of different data and together also trying to answer the questions that we still have. What you just mentioned, yeah, I guess indeed the data will have to be available because otherwise it won't end up with the financial institutions. But fortunately, what I see at the moment, there's a lot of cooperation. So I think that's very positive.
Yes, and if I may, like you said, we have many frameworks, many initiatives that made us think about, okay, what I need to be fit for purpose exactly. So we are currently doing the pilot testing for the TNFD framework. And we are also thinking, okay, maybe we need more data on that. Maybe we need more data on that. Or maybe we need to sync the platform or our report differently to be usable by the financial institution to assess transition risk, physical risk, and yeah, to act after. So it's also a good thing to have all those framework and initiatives today. So yeah. I'm
gonna steal the microphone. It helps to be sitting next to the facilitator to pick up the mic. But I have a question for you. Where do you see there to be sort of gaping holes or gaps in terms of data and platforms, tools to address that. So thinking about different types of biomes or certain areas of the world. I mean, we talked a lot about deforestation risk. Deforestation risk, I think, is well represented, partly because you can use satellite imagery to measure if there's a forest there or not, right? But what about soil health, regenerative agriculture techniques and the effectiveness, or in the marine biome, for example? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on where you think there are gaps and potentially what the solutions are, or how do we fill those gaps?
Nearly Christmas, so we'll do our Christmas list. I would first add a small comment about deforestation, which is that, in my opinion, it doesn't relate completely to the transparency factors, because I think that if I bet that in companies using major companies, I mean constituent of the MSCI World, for instance, using deforestation linked commodity, looking at the report, I'm confident that they will write something on the fact that they engage with their supply chain, look to improve the situation and so on. But what is lacking is certification. And that's something very different and necessary for data provider for us, which cannot rely on nice speech and language within a report. So I just want to stress that certification, that's something different. And certification of deforestation-linked commodities. Certification on the fact that they do not come from deforestation. And not just, speech, even in written form. But to come back to your question, to put on the Christmas list, I will mention, if you look at the materiality of what is missing at footprinting level for a company like us, I would say something like dredging, because dredging hurts, submarines and obviously biodiversity, and on that, well, I think that we need financial institutions, academics, and so on, sponsoring the development of tools, quantitative solutions, and so on, because it is a part of a supply chain, which is important, and well, where we lack of, we have a huge gap there, in my opinion, one of many, but other will probably come. Dredging, that's to in the supply chain of
Fish. That's when you
remove sand. Yes, for the building material industry. A source of the disappearance of some beaches, among other issues which are not visible and which are done there. And important industry, massive players, not listed, so not so much things published or done about it, but major counterparties of some banks, I suspect.
I think it was a very good question. Because I always, many sessions I hear stuff and I think, I have no idea what they're talking about. Yeah, finally someone who just asked. No, I think you already identified most of the gaps, I guess. Marine was already mentioned. Parts of the world were already mentioned. I mentioned ExIO-based. Well, they have rest of the world regions. So there's data lacking actually there. I think maybe to add one is when you're talking about dependencies, on course looking at direct dependencies. You can already look at indirect dependencies as well, I guess. But of course, a dependency is not yet a risk. So what about the trends in ecosystem services? Within Encore, you can look at the natural capital assets that underpin the ecosystem services, but that's a difficult thing to understand. So what we would like to have probably is have maps with trends in ecosystem services. That would really help in at least a dependency question. And for the rest, I think most have probably been mentioned, and there's probably more.
Yeah, so there are some gaps, but what we tried to do was to show you what you could already do with what we have today. And so thank you very much for all what you've been able to tell us. I'm sorry, I keep going round and round because it's a bit bizarre as a setup.